Part 3, Chapter 7. Breathe and focus. We all choke. Winners know how to handle choking better than losers. You have to learn how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Choker. It's the ugliest label in sports. Society views choking in competition as dishonorable, shameful, and unforgivable. Athletes who choke are seen as cowards, weak-willed, their moral character is flawed. The Houston Rockets blew a 20-point lead in the fourth quarter at home against the Phoenix Suns in a 1994 NBA playoff loss. The next day's condemning headlines in both Houston newspapers screamed, "Choke City, why our town?" One sports writer moaned in print. It was as if he took the team's defeat personally. His face burned with shame. In sports, there is no more damning gesture than a mocking hand to the throat, the choke sign. Yet choking happens every day. It happens in Wimbledon. It happens at the Olympic Games. No one is immune. We all choke, said golfer Curtis Strange, who won back-to-back U.S. Open championships. You're not human if you haven't. We get just as nervous as the average guy playing for the club championship. Leah Trevino compares an athlete who caves into anxiety with a race car suffering mechanical problems. Everybody leaks oil. In 1996, Greg Norman blew a 6-shot lead in the final round of the Masters. His fate inspired comparisons with the late-season collapse of the '64 Phillies and the Hindenburg disaster. Last spring, Blaine McAllister only had to par the last hole in New Orleans to win the first PGA tournament in 7 years. He made bogey. Then, he missed a 4-foot putt on the first playoff hole that would have clinched the victory. McAllister lost on the next hole to Carlos Franco. It had been a long time, and the old nerves were going a little bit, McAllister said, when asked to explain his unraveling. I felt like I blend all over the place out there. I'll be the first to admit I choked it and missed it on the 73rd hole. It cost me, and I'll hear about it for a while. McAllister wasn't the only one. A week earlier, Craig Stadler had a chance to win for the first time since 1996. His putter failed him on 3 playoff holes. He finished second to Robert Allenby at the Houston Open. Choking is a normal human reaction, a physiological response to a perceived psychological threat. To demonstrate what choking is, I ask athletes to stand and do the breathless exercise. You can do it too. First, I tell the group this is a contest. I'm going to watch each of them and judge everyone's performance carefully. Then I begin, barking verbal commands. Look left, look right, look left, look right, look left, look right, look right. Some automatically dart their eyes to the left, anticipating that command. As they continue the task, their anxiety increases. Their breathing pattern changes. Without realizing it, many hold their breath. Oxygen is energy. It's juice. Oxygen helps relax muscles and clear the mind. When you hold your breath, you are creating pressure and a nervous feeling. Athletes who choke start to become nervous about being nervous, anxious about being anxious. One psychologist says anxiety is excitement without the breath. The pattern of your breathing affects the pattern of your performance. When you are under stress, deep breathing helps bring your mind and body back to the present. Over the years, I have handed out thousands of little stickers to athletes that read, "Breathe and focus." A baseball player will play the bright orange circle on the shoulder of his uniform or underneath the bill of his cap, or on the barrel of his bat. A hockey player might affix it to his stick. Firefighters I have worked with place the stickers on their left contained breathing apparatus. On their self-contained breathing apparatus. The stickers serve as a reminder. Whenever they feel themselves growing anxious, breathe in energy, breathe out negativity, breathe in relaxation, breathe out stress. One year at spring training, the Mariners tested a new pitcher they had acquired in a trade. The club wanted to see if he could go 5 innings. In the 5th, he began to fade. He gave up a hit, then another, then another. Seated in the dugout, Lou Piniella turned to me and shook his head. "Mac," Piniella said, "this guy doesn't know how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable." Piniella sent his pitching coach to the mound. When he returned, the coach told Lou, "His eyes are in the back of his head." Translation: the guy isn't there anymore. Piniella took the pitcher out. What did he mean by learning how to become comfortable with being uncomfortable? Have you ever stepped in a cold shower or an icy lake or a swimming pool? The cold takes your breath away. Your first impulse is to get out. But if you breathe and stay focused, you gradually become accustomed to the water temperature. The experience is akin to performing under pressure. By breathing and focusing, you can systematically desensitize yourself. In addition to changing their breathing patterns, athletes under stress become internally self-conscious instead of externally task-conscious. The focus turns inward. I suggest athletes who become anxious focus externally. When one of my best friends, Jim Colborn, pitched for the Brewers, he refocused on the task by looking at the flagpole in Milwaukee's County Stadium. Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the following about bird hunting, but the advice applies to any athlete in competition. If you want to hit a bird on the wing, you must have all of your will in a focus. You must not be thinking about yourself, and equally, you must not be thinking about your neighbor. You must be living in your eye on that bird. Choking is nothing more than paying attention to your physiology when you should be focusing on your opponent and the task. Chapter 8. Be here now. Each point I play is in the now moment. The last point means nothing. The next point means nothing. Billie Jean King. You must be present to win. Alex Rodriguez. Alex Rodriguez enjoyed a magical season in 1996. The young shortstop in the Mariners led the American League in batting averages, runs, total bases, grand slams, and doubles. And he was a runner-up most valuable player, finishing second to Juan Gonzalez of Texas in the closest vote in more than 35 years. 5 months later, Alex reported to spring training, eager to start anew. Rodriguez is a likable fellow, and his disposition is as sunny as the Arizona sky. I greeted him with a hug. Then I asked about his goals for the coming year. Most athletes are numbers oriented. A ball player doesn't have to look up his slugging percentages or earned run average. His stats are like important phone numbers. He knows them by heart. So I expected this 21-year-old to say he wanted to drive in more runs or raise his batting average, which would take some doing. Alex hit .358 the previous year. Instead, his answer floored me and made me smile. Bat Mac, Rodriguez said, addressing me by my baseball nickname. My only goal is to learn how to play one entire game in the present. To play an entire game in the present moment is the ultimate in mental discipline. Many managers and coaches preach the value of playing the game one pitch at a time or one play at a time. One reason Alex became a star at a young age is because he recognizes the importance of the mental game and understands what it is to play in the present. But the skills isn't quickly or easily learned. The late Bobby Jones, one of the greatest golfers in history, said, "It's nothing new or original to say that golf is played one stroke at a time. But it took me years to realize it." Successful athletes who speak of playing in the zone are describing what it feels like to perform in the present, mind and body attuned, working together. When you are playing your game right on time, in the present, you perform at your best. Why? Because in the present, there is no pressure. Pressure is created by anxieties about the future and remembered failures from the past. If a baseball player comes to the plate thinking about his last strikeout, or says to himself, "If I don't start hitting, I'll be on the bench soon," is he playing in the present? Obviously, the answer is no. During an off season, I worked with one of the premier baseball stealers in the game. "What happens?" I asked. "If while on base he begins thinking about the last time he was thrown out." To make a point, I jumped on his back. I felt like an oversized papoose. But the player got the message. It is easier to steal a base with a monkey on your back, thinking about the past instead of the present. Can only slow you down. In a Peanuts comic strip, Lucy is apologizing to Charlie Brown. "Sorry, I missed the easy fly ball, manager." In the second frame, Lucy says, "I thought I had it, but suddenly I remembered all the others I've missed." In the last panel, she diagnoses her problem. "The past got in my eyes," I would tell Lucy what I tell professional athletes. As you learned earlier, worrying about a mistake will usually get you another one just like it. One key to learning how to play the game at your best is recognizing when your head is not in the present. I am reminded of the television public service message that asks parents, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?" Ask yourself this: it's game time. Do you know where your mind is? My definition of awareness is paying attention on purpose without analysis or judgment. Simply put, it is moment-to-moment observation, being absorbed in the task. Try this. Become aware of your breathing. Count the breaths you take. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Repeat. Repeat the exercise. Do it again. Keep counting. Again. It seems like a simple task, but eventually your mind begins to wander. If your mind isn't on your breathing, what is it on? I recently had a conversation with a National Hockey League player. He described a game in which he found himself repeatedly glancing at the clock as the seconds ticked away on his shift. All he could think about was the fact he hadn't scored and time was running out. If he had one eye on the clock, I told him, then he had only one eye on the puck. To be present to win, both eyes have to be on the target: the puck, the ball, the basket, or the job at hand. Let the clock take care of itself. How do you place your mind in the here and now? When I worked with the Chicago Cubs, we used a technique called the mental locker. When a player arrived at the clubhouse at Wrigley Field on the visiting ballpark, he opened his mental locker. With each article of clothing he removed, his jacket, his shirt, his belt, one sock, then the other, he let go of a problem or a personal concern. By the time he had changed from civilian clothes into his uniform, he had shed all the distractions and personal concerns and was focusing on the present. He was in the right time zone and the ideal state of mind to experience success on the field. Joe Paterno is one of college's football's most admired and successful coaches. Every football player at Penn State is familiar with the blue line that divides the campus and the school's football complex. Papa Joe tells each student athlete that before he crosses that imaginary blue line on the way to practice or when he leaves his locker for a game, he expects him to dump all his worries and concerns. Once he steps across the line, he cannot be thinking about what grade he made on yesterday's math test or daydreaming about tomorrow's night date. The moment he crosses the threshold, his mind should be focused on Penn State football and nothing else. If it isn't, he is shortchanging himself as an athlete. He is also hurting the team. He is not fully present to win. Chapter 9. Hurry slowly. Be quick, but never hurry. John Wooden. Never hurry when it counts. Joanne Carner. You can only feel the excitement on the first morning of the Griffey International Baseball Camp. More than 200 kids from Alabama to Australia gather at the Disney World Sports Complex in Orlando, which is the spring training home of the Atlanta Braves, for 5 days of baseball instruction and fun. Lined up along the third base line, the youngsters are wearing their camp t-shirts and big smiles that say they can't wait to get started. As director of sports psychology for Griffey International, I would welcome the kids to the camp and then conduct a contest. We're going to find out who the fastest kid in camp is, I tell them. Now, when I count to 3, you have to wait for the count. When I count to 3, I want everybody, all of you, to run to the nearest fence. Standing at shortstop, I glance at the center field fence behind me. From the smallest to largest, the campers toe the third base chalk line in delicious anticipation, motors revving. Okay, you ready? I pause for dramatic effect. 1, 2, 3, go! In a burst of pent-up energy, away they go, dashing straight ahead, legs churning, arms pumping, the wind snatching baseball caps off their heads. After reaching the center field fence, the sprinters return, panting and exhausted. Then a comprehending look comes over their faces as they spot about a dozen campers, smiling like the cat that ate the canary and leaning nonchalantly against the fence behind the third base line. They aren't winded, and they aren't tired. Those few had ignored my nonverbal cue and simply turned around as instructed, gone to the nearest fence. The others feel a little like former NFL defense great Jim Marshall after he picked up a fumble and ran 62 yards into the end zone, the wrong end zone, and scored a safety for the other team. In sports, what happens when we become anxious and emotionally charged? Most people start rushing. They speed up and get ahead of themselves. A second baseman trying to turn a double play will throw the ball before he has control of it. A wide receiver will turn upfield before he makes a catch. A pitcher walks a batter and then surrenders a home run at a critical point in the game. Suddenly, he and his team are in a hole. His breathing quickens. His heart begins to trip, hammering in his chest. Angry with himself, his ego bruised, the pitcher is no longer thinking clearly. His mind starts to race. He takes himself out of the normal rhythm without even knowing it. When an athlete is in the zone, everything around him seems to slow down. He feels as if he is performing at an almost leisurely pace. Under stress, the pitcher's world is speeded up like an old silent movie. He feels a rising sense of urgency. He becomes as panicky as the frantic white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. I'm so late. So very, very late. In a hurry, his mind no longer is in the present. He reverts to what coaches call primitive pitching. Instead of pitching with purpose, he speeds up. His command changes from ready, aim, fire to ready, fire, aim. The pitcher is like a Peruvian tennis player I watched competing in the Davis Cup. The Peruvian was quicker and more talented than his Bahamian opponent. And he was having his way in the match until he got a bad line call. And then another one. He became visibly angry. After that, all his movements appeared hurried. Still, simmering, he sailed through the next game so fast, I doubt he even knew what he was doing. Unable to regain his composure and slow his tempo, he lost the next 2 sets and the match. Recall what Jack Nicklaus said in the section entitled The Pressure Principle. When an athlete tenses up, he often wants to get the test over and done with as fast as possible. The more he hurries, the worse he will probably perform. And the worse he performs, the more he hurries, creating a self-defeating cycle. Lee Trevino didn't enjoy playing at the Masters. He said the course didn't fit his game. He complained about the speed of the greens, jokingly suggesting that before each round tournament officials coated them with STP, a motor oil additive. Trevino plays fast, but he may have set a speed record for touring Augusta's National's 18 holes. Frustrated and irritated by his poor play, Trevino barely settled into the stance before whacking his second shot towards the green on the 18th hole. Alluding to the Civil War and the Union general who buried Atlanta, Trevino hurried toward the Whites' plantation-style clubhouse, muttering, "Sherman should have finished the job." The Arizona Cardinals were in San Francisco to play the 49ers. While seated on the team bus for the ride to the Cardinals' Candlestick Park, I noticed a sign above the driver's head. The sign was titled "The First Rule of Holes," and it read, "When you find yourself in a hole, the first rule is to stop digging." All athletes become frustrated. At some point, they all dig themselves into a hole. The best advice I can give is to remember the first rule of holes. If you find yourself in a hole, imagine a red traffic sign that says stop. Sometimes, the best form of action is inaction. What's the old saying? Don't just do something, stand there. What many young athletes need to learn is that sometimes going faster can make them slower. It's one of the paradoxes of sports. Whenever Seattle pitcher James Moyer finds himself in a hole, when he feels his anxiety rise and he starts to get the gadas thinking, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, he knows it's time for him to put the shovel down. Moyer steps off the mound and onto the infield grass. He rubs up the ball, turning it over his hands. He shakes the tension from his neck. He takes a break and a breath. The most successful athletes do what Moyer does and what managers do. They call a timeout and gather themselves. Earlier, we talked about creating a mind gym. Go back to your mind gym and recreate a situation in which you fell into a competitive hole and became over anxious and panicky. Recall how you responded, then rewrite the script. Visualize taking a timeout. See yourself refocusing and returning to the present. Remember, the first step toward regaining composure and tempo is right under your nose, just a deep breath away.